right, so I'm going to let you guys just speculate in the side chat as to what I did to Cirrus to make him make that face. But hi, welcome. You all might notice, if you're not in the Discord, that there's a certain co-host missing. Jen is having some family stuff going on right now, unfortunately. Kid got into some stuff that he wasn't supposed to, so wonderfully and thankfully, Cirrus has agreed to be my emergency co-host and to talk about the literacy crisis. Welcome, Cirrus. You are the most frequent emergency co-host that I've called on here. This is what, the fourth time that you've bailed my ass out?
This is the reason why I'm making this face. This is the exact reason why we're here.
We got
it in to sleep. I'm kidding.
I gave you the option to say no. I said I would go into the brave world on my own, but you insisted it was okay.
I'm gonna blink twice if I'm not okay.
Well, of course, you know that it's definitely not me that is doing this. We got 2 super chats in before the show even started. Thank you so much, by the way, guys. Child of Nick says that they aren't going to be able to stick around for the Scream, have to be up early, but wish me the best. Thank you so much. And we also had Richie Davis, who said not going to be able to stick around for the video, but I wish you all the best. So thank you guys both for the preemptive super chats. I'm really, really grateful to have you guys here. And for all of you who could make it, Poor Cirrus is stuck here, and also those jiggle physics, man. God. Hail the unblinking one. Oh, that was like a scary kind of like sex face for a second there. That was weird. But anyway, Cirrus's VTuber attitude aside, this is the first time he's had it on my channel. Good God. Oh my. It's so distracting. It is so freaking distracting.
I will not be contained.
Funnily enough, Cirrus has been doing videos on the Super Straight thing. I'm not going to get into that, like, here. People have asked me my opinion on it a couple of times. The too long didn't read of my opinion is, A, they're leaving non-binary people completely the fuck out of the conversation, so apparently I can just screw right off because I am my genitals, according to these people, so fuck them anyway. But
no,
also,
no, don't fuck them. Don't let them breed.
Yeah, don't let them breed. But also, as far as the claims about the sexuality and validity and all that stuff, like... if they think they're using the arguments of the left against the left, they clearly don't understand those arguments. Like, just saying the same words does not mean you're making the same point. That's all I've got to say on that.
That's why my position, as I said earlier on the stream, is you're valid. You want a cookie?
Ikeda Hakubi, sorry, Cirrus, Jen is still better. All aboard. Oh, God, we've got boob trains in the chat. For those of you who don't know, by the way, the boob train is an emote that you can get access to if you decide to sign up for, I believe I have it set to $2.99 to help recoup the cost from JACandQuill. JACandQuill made some amazing emotes. Channel memberships are how you get access to those in the side chat. I wish I could give them away for free because, you know, the memes for the proletariat, I've given them in the Discord away for free, but YouTube doesn't let you do that as a creator. Like, you have to make people pay for them, so I'm like, I'm going to set it to just about as low as YouTube will let me without, like, you know, basically the fee eating up the whole damn thing. Anna, thank you so much. First week back home. Glad to be back and watching your content again, Allie. Thank you so much. So we were going to talk today about something that isn't discussed all that often. But I know, actually, funnily enough, your state was one of the ones referenced in the research that I was reading about illiteracy, the illiteracy crisis in America, and it absolutely is a crisis. So do you want to kind of start off a little bit talking about, like, what illiteracy is? Because a lot of people think it's like the inability to comprehend letters and to read, but it's a lot more complicated than that.
Okay, so basically, like you said, illiteracy sounds like when you say it immediately, the first thing that comes to mind is, oh, you can't read. Like, oh, you're illiterate, you can't read. And it's not just not being able to read, it's not just being able to not comprehend. It's also not being able to put context clues together. So, for instance, if I'm looking at a bottle of medicine, if I'm only able to read at like a 4th or 5th grade level, my ability to discern how many milligrams of medicine and how often I need to give this medicine to me or my child is severely hampered. It's not like just having the words close together and not framed the same way that like a written sentence would be makes it harder for me to understand. Like, not me specifically, but were I reading at a 4th grade level, I say, as I unironically listen to a lot of audiobooks. So it's inability to do stuff like that. It's also inability to, like, if you were handed a book like Stuart Little, you'd be able to read that just fine. Like, that would not be a problem for you. But if I handed you legal documentation and I asked you to parse the legal documentation, tell me what's being said here, that could be incredibly difficult for you. Now, I want you to imagine how often you've had to sign a contract in your life. Now imagine you can't comprehend a contract, but you think you can because it's words, and they're all words you recognize, and you can read them on the paper.
So we got a $5 super chat from Caffeinated and Jaded. Kaidate, my dudes. Thank you so much. Caffeinated and Jaded is actually one of my newest patrons. So thank you so much for signing up, and thank you so much for being here. Another example of literacy, and we'll get into, I will be linking in the live chat shortly it's a scale. It's the National Assessment of Adult Literacy Scale, which explains the 5 levels of literacy. So numbers 1 through 5, based off of a test that you can take. And these things, for somebody who did, say, get through, graduate high school, maybe even take a little bit of college, they sound almost... The tasks at the various levels sound almost simplistic if you're used to, say, reading research regularly or things like that. But when you realize that 52% of Americans, according to this governmental body, cannot read at a level enough where they could comprehend, say, reading the language on a credit card offer and understand the difference between one and another and compare the two and figure out which one is the better one, like, because literacy also includes mathematical skills. So the ability to, say, figure out how long it would take you to pay off a zero, like how big of a payment you'd have to make a 0 interest loan go away before the interest the 0 interest period runs out. That would be another example of literacy. Terralana, thank you so much for the $15 super chat. I'm so glad you're covering this. I was fortunate enough to have things like high school science fiction classes that helped me develop my love of words. Yeah, literacy, like sexuality and politics, exactly, exists on a spectrum. So talking about the different literacy levels, the ones that we're the most concerned about are levels 1 and 2. So a level 2 literate person reads around the 6th grade level. So they might have a difficult time with, if you were to say, has anybody ever actually tried to read the terms of service for like a website or something? Sometimes it's written in really coded language, but sometimes, like with Discord TOS, it's actually pretty simple to read. In fact, sometimes the language is so simple that like trying to figure out what the words mean actually goes in the opposite direction. Like, well, what about this instance? What about that instance? You know what I mean? A person who reads at the 6th grade level might even have a hard time understanding, say, Discord's terms of service. You can see how when you start to get into things like voting or like trying to read your mail and like pay your bills, how reading at a 6th grade level or below might become a problem.
And now there's an angle to that I kind of want to talk about real quick. 2 things. One, this is both a very expensive thing and a very profitable thing. It's 2 sides of this coin. Individualistically, people being this illiterate is very profitable, because if you are someone like, say, a Ben Shapiro, and you are trying to tell an audience what the Equality Act reads, like what it functionally does, not only is the likelihood already going to be low that your audience is going to go in and read the material, if your audience is at a level 2 reading level, they are probably not going to be able to pull anything out outside of what you've given them from that text. So they're going to go along with what you do, and they're going to continue listening to, essentially, false information from you as an individual information broker, which is what you've become at that point. However, because 52% of the United States read at under that level 3 level, that nationally costs us, what is it, $2.2 billion? Like, as a country, this is very expensive. But if you're an individual wanting to be predatory, this is incredibly lucrative.
So, two things. First off, Carbuncle, great topic and something that's not talked about a lot. Thank you so much, Carbuncle. We also have a new membership. Thank you so much, Tiled and Nix, for becoming a member of the channel. You now have access to all of those emotes. I am still trying to filter in emotes from the Discord. Unfortunately, YouTube locks it behind how many members you have as a channel. So every time I'm able to get enough members to get to the next level, I will unlock the next emote and put it in there. Eventually, I'm hoping to get all the Discord emotes on there. But for right now, I'm putting in the ones that people are voting on as the ones that they want. Also, if you are a channel member and you're in my Discord, but you're not also a patron, let me know so I can get you the Patreon role so that you can join in the patron area. I know that there are a few folks that swapped their Patreon memberships out for channel memberships. I still want you to be able to have access to the patron area. Let me know if you're not also a patron, and so I can get you that access. But yeah, I actually sent you a Forbes article on this, Cirrus, that I've been reading, because this came out last year, but it's actually kind of concerning. They say that folks that are in the lower literacy levels, which according to the research that I read, there's no particular industry that has a median literacy level of 1 or below. Which we should probably get into the literacy levels really fast, because we started to get into them and then we I got distracted.
They got referenced, but after you got to literacy level 3, after you got right after literacy level 2, you just kind of dropped off.
Yeah, so let's go a little bit into what the literacy levels are, because again, they sound kind of basic to anybody who has a higher proficiency in literacy, which I would argue that most of my audience probably does. The kind of research and the density of the information that I present in my videos might be a little bit harder for somebody who is on the lower end of the literacy spectrum to deal with, which I've been trying to actually make things more accessible for my 101 content for that reason, because part of the reason I started my channel was to help folks who might have a harder time doing research be able to get access to good information. I don't think any research, I don't think that any religious anything should be put behind a paywall, and it shouldn't be put behind a skill wall either. I feel like religion should be accessible to everybody, and same with scientific information.
I would argue that all research should have that stipulation. The amount of times that I've encountered somebody that thinks that they've uncovered some wealth of not wealth of knowledge, that's not the word I'm looking for, who thinks they've uncovered some conspiracy because they've read a document that was a legal document, and the document stated in the legal document that for the purposes of the legal document, the United States would be treated with the same language as a corporation, and they infer from that, oh my God, the United States is actually a corporation. Did you know that we are all involuntary employees of the United States of America Incorporated? And I'm just having to sit there and go, did we read 2 different papers? I know we didn't read 2 different papers.
Well, yeah, and that actually would fall in the difference between literacy levels 3, 4, and 5. So let's take a look at literacy level 1 is also reframed as below basic. This is the literacy level with the widest range of what you might be capable of. I did put a link to the article that I'm referencing here. It's from the National Center for Educational Statistics. It is a Gov site. Below basic indicates no more than the most simple and concrete literacy skills. Now, according to this same institute, which they put out studies about every 3 or 4 years to kind of figure out where everybody's at, 18% of U.S. adults in 2014 and 19% in 2017, so this problem is getting worse, are at the level 1 or below in the United States. Level 1 or below ranges from being completely non-literate in English to having these sorts of abilities, and I'm going to read them off the site. So, searching a short, simple text to find out what a patient is allowed to drink before a medical test, signing a form, adding the amounts on a bank deposit slip, locating easily identify information in short, commonplace prose texts, locating easily identifiable information and following written instructions in simple documents like charts or forms, and locating numbers and using them to perform simple quantitative operations, primarily addition when the mathematical information is very concrete and familiar. So this is like the bottom of the bottom. This is Like I've seen it compared to at about the first or second grade level. Basically, you understand addition and subtraction, you know how to read very, very simple like words. You could probably read a Dr. Seuss book. When you start to get into anything much more complex than that, you're gonna start to struggle if you're at the literacy level 1, also known as below basic.
This is where, like, if you were handed something like Lord of the Flies, that would just have to get discarded across a room.
Yes.
Which I think Lord of the Flies is actually like literacy level 3, isn't it?
Yeah, Lord of the Flies would be literacy level 3. It's about high school graduate level.
Yeah.
And the themes in it, one could argue, are a little higher than that if you've studied it, because it means a lot more than just what it is, which is something people often forget about literature.
I had to do an entire study course on it in English class, and I don't want to go into detail. But everybody in that class came away from that book hating it.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically toxic masculinity, but kids. Anyhow, coming back to level 2, this is basic literacy. It's the skills necessary to perform simple and everyday literacy activities. So this is like at a 5th or 6th grade level. So this is reading and understanding information in short, commonplace prose text, reading and understanding information in simple documents, being able to solve simple one-step problems when the arithmetic operation is specified or easily inferred, finding a pamphlet for prospective jurors, an explanation for how people were selected for the jury pool, using a TV guide to find out what programs are on at a specific time, comparing the ticket prices for 2 events. So this is, again, very, very basic levels of understanding. This is like, you're probably going to have a harder time understanding what's going on your bills, but you probably know what the numbers mean. But like when you start reading all of these extra fees, trying to figure out what they are, you're going to have a much harder time. For example, the majority of the US actually fits either here or at level 3 or above. So we've got 33% of the US, both in 2014 and 2017, sit here. So the majority of people in the United States, both in 2014 and 2017, 52% of the US is below level 3, which is intermediate skills. This is high school graduate level. This is, you can read your bills and probably understand them. You can probably read your voter's pamphlet and understand it. You can probably read like the credit card percentages and, you know, maybe with some like Google and a calculator kind of understand what, like which of the rewards programs between 2 different credit card offers you're getting is probably going to be more lucrative for you. You can probably calculate out how long it's going to take you, like what payments you need to make in order to pay off a 0% APR thing within 6 months. You probably have the skills to do that if you're at level 3. When you get to levels 4 and 5, these get a little more nebulous, but this is when you start to get into like research skills. This is when you start to get into being able to discern a bad source of information from a good source of information. This is when you start to get into being able to track down information and process it and synthesize it from multiple sources. So like Suris and I, for example, when we do research on particularly contentious political topics, we're going to have to go to multiple different sources. Like even here, I have cited, you know, the National Center for Education Statistics. I've got an article from Forbes. You know, being able to synthesize all of that information together and then present it, that is a literacy level 4 and 5 skill. So we are at the point where the majority of adults in the United States don't have that ability.
Now, there is you obviously know what angle I'm going to be tackling this from. Mm-hmm. Because for me, it's not just that this is a problem of literacy. This is a problem of the United States education system as a whole. This is a symptom of the way the United States education system works. For those who don't know, at a very basic level, the U.S. system is based around creating a good factory worker. Like, full stop. That's what it does. That's what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to make it to where you can operate well in a factory. People at reading level 2 can not only operate well in a factory, they will also necessarily be limited to working in that factory, and it'll be harder for them to move farther from there. It is also a lot easier to politically manipulate someone. As I mentioned before, Shapiro is an example. Dennis Prager's another example who will do this. It's a lot easier to politically manipulate someone if you're in a position of power, if their literacy level is lower, because they've got to trust that you came out of research papers with the right information. Because if you didn't, who else are they going to ask? Likely the people around them went to the same education system, did the same things, and had the same outcomes. If you're in a position of authority, it is incredibly easy to abuse someone if they are at one of these lower literacy levels. I can give another very easy example that all of you have probably dealt with at least one time in your life or know somebody who has. Consider the evangelical pastor and how often they are presenting information that is not strictly within a religious text. Now I want you to consider if your literacy level is already between a 1 and 2, you're not only taken advantage of politically, you're not only taken advantage of economically at work, but now even your thoughts and emotions are very, very subject to the whims of people presenting information to you religiously. You are in, if you are in this area, you are an incredibly vulnerable person. And you also don't have the context to know that you are in many cases, and that's dangerous.
So we have a question from the chat that I think is useful. What reading level would being able to understand medical terminology be? That would probably be between 3 and 5, depending on what kind of medical terminology. If you're, say, for example, talking about reading a label and understanding what kind of medication to give yourself or your kid, that would be a literacy level 2 or 3. If you're talking about understanding, say, a medical chart with, say, a doctor's assistance, that would be between 3 and 4. If you're talking about actually understanding medical terminology itself, that's more of a vocabulary issue. It would be level 5 if you're talking about the ability to go and get information from multiple sources so that you can get a thorough understanding of what those terms mean.
If I were to hand you if you're a reading level 3, and I were to hand you a biomed piece from Nature, that's going to look really dense, and it's going to be really hard to understand. It's hard for me to understand half the time. I'm having to grab stuff from Wikipedia as well that's usually written in more layman's terms to try to, like you said earlier, synthesize that so I can get context on what I'm reading.
But that would be a level 5 skill. The ability to go and find that information from another place and then synthesize that and then go back to the original text and apply that new information, that is a level 5 skill. Now, keep in mind, you'd be surprised. Most people who have graduated high school or who have some level of higher education, whether that's some college, like in my case, or, if you've actually graduated college, as in the case of several of the creators that I've worked with, then you probably have that skill and kind of just think of it as a natural thing to do. Like, why wouldn't somebody be able to do this? But stop and think about the difference in the education that you likely received, either from your parents or another family member or from the school system itself, and some of the folks that we're talking about here. Because according to the same studies that I actually linked earlier, the number one predictor for low literacy levels is the literacy level and or socioeconomic status of the parents.
Like I said before, you will likely be locked around the people who are in the exact same situation as you.
Yeah. And I mean, like, these literacy levels, people who have higher education, because they get more practice with these things, are more likely to retain them into adulthood. But there's also a chance that after you graduated high school, if you just don't read or research a lot, these things actually can regress. Like, you can keep, say, basic, like, arithmetic, but lose your ability to do, even, say, geometry at, like, an 8th grade level or a 10th grade level.
I know that's what's happened with me. I could do geometry after having failed it once, because I am also just bad at math in general, but I could do it back in high school. But if you ask me to do it now, I'm probably going to ban you out of my chat and ban you out of my Discord. And please get that away from me. It's evil. Don't do it.
So when we're talking about literacy problems, though, like I'd like to kind of go back to the economic thing a little bit, because there is, like, we'll get into the systemic issues a little bit later on, in part because I'm getting fed up with people treating literacy like it's a moral issue. More often than not, it's not. It's actually a systemic societal failing. Like, the majority of the time, if a kid falls behind in a shitty school, there is not a support network to pick them back up, especially if they don't have parents that have the capability of doing so, either due to their own literacy levels or due to generational poverty. Like, at that point, that kid doesn't have a chance. They're going to grow up to be an adult with lowered levels of literacy. And there's this serious power dynamic that ends up with that, like with other people in that person's life. If you've got somebody going through your mail to read it for you, then you now have this power dynamic between you and your neighbor or your spouse or whoever it is that's doing these things for you, or even your kids, like where that person's now up in your business and you don't have a choice about it because otherwise you can't pay your fucking bills. Like, that's an issue.
Like, your ball and chain locked to other people. Your ability to be an independent person it doesn't exist.
Yeah. And like, and we are going to get back into that, but when we're talking about like the individual economic opportunities, we're looking at people who might have a hard time with, has anybody ever gotten a fast food job? Like, I know you have, Cirrus. You know those dumb videos that you have to watch that are like the most simplistic language ever, and you're sitting here going, I read this in the pamphlet that you gave me. Why am I now watching a video to have this instruction? Because I clearly understood it the first time.
Remember, here at McDonald's, we try not to burn ourselves on the burner. And also, please remember, never unionize. Ever. Oh, sorry. McDonald's didn't give me the anti-union propaganda as much.
Target gave me that, though.
It was Walmart for me. Walmart was the one who gave me all the anti-union propaganda.
Yeah, Target did that for me. Target's whole thing was, because, like, for those of you who don't know, in Washington, the majority of our grocery stores are unionized. It's a union called UFCW 21. I used to work for it. Union jobs are going to be 100% better most of the time than anything else you'll ever work, just flat out. There's a lot of security in it. It's a lot better most of the time if your union is good. But anyway, Target's anti-union propaganda was mostly like, oh, well, we've got this like shift swap board thing, and the union would make it so you can't do that anymore because of all of the rules around, like, this most senior people have to be able to work the best shifts, or like get guaranteed full time if they want them. And that'll get rid of the shift swap board. So like, you totally shouldn't unionize, and you need to report anybody to your manager that's trying to get you to unionize.
Yep. That was the same. So for Walmart, there were 3 videos specifically that we had on it. And the first one was like, what is a union? It tried to define it in like very, very vague terms. The second and third ones were like, should you make a union? And it gave you this list of reasons why you shouldn't. Like, kind of like how yours had, if you do this, you won't have this. With Walmart, it was mostly about keeping your paycheck. They're like, if you had a union, they would take a percentage of your paycheck, and you don't want them to do that.
Target harped on that too. They just really stressed the fucking shift swap board thing.
Yeah, we didn't have a shift swap board because everything is nightmarishly compartmentalized in Walmart by department. So that's not something that we had there. But then I remember that like the third one was the union busting one, where like, you weren't told to bust a union, but you were told to report one. But they didn't say they would bust it, because that would be illegal.
No, you just Celery earlier says Tim Hortons just quietly fires you for unrelated reasons when you mention unions. That's kind of how Target was. Ikeda Hakubi, $5 super chat. Even a bad union is better than no union. We're stronger together. Thank you so much, Ikeda. But coming back to kind of what we're talking about here, if you're talking about somebody who's illiterate, and again, I'm using this not as a pejorative, I'm using this as a specific term for somebody in the 2 or 1 category of literacy levels. If you have somebody who sits within that particular spectrum of illiteracy, you're going to actually need those videos in order to comprehend things. But you're also not going to be able to read the training materials that you need to read in order to make management. So your ability to advance is going to be severely hampered by your lack of literacy. This can also happen when it comes to moving into more technical jobs. If you're at a level 1, which again, remember, 1 out of every 5 people in America is at literacy level 1. 18%. 1 out of every fucking 5. There are 75 people currently in my chat. That means that approximately, let's see, can I do the math in my bloody head?
While you try to do the math, Ikeda asked, what level do you need to read Kropotkin? I'm going to be honest. I feel like Kropotkin's level 3. Kropotkin's not that dense. He's redundant, but he's not that dense.
Yeah, being a bad writer doesn't mean that you're a difficult writer to read. It just means you're a bad writer.
Oh,
like,
so
Jordan Peterson is also literacy level 3.
I'm glad we agree, because Conquest of Bread bored me to tears.
It really did. Like, Conquest of Bread is fantastic for if somebody's like shaking their fist at you and they're like, well, how could navigate XYZ thing in an anarcho-communist society? It's like, here, thunk, have the bread book. Like, this is almost any objection that you have is handled in here. But like, it's not, it's just redundant and rambly. It's not dense.
It's very much a train of thought. If you want to read 10 hours of one old man's stream of thought, by all means, but that's what I got out of the bread book. It didn't move my socialist needle. I was already
want to talk about a level. You want to talk about level fucking 5, though. You want to talk about dense. I was dumb and decided to read Society of the Spectacle. That motherfucker invented an entire goddamn language for his philosophy. You have to read a ton of his other work in order to understand what the hell he's saying, because it's not just philosophy language, it is his philosophy language. It's well worth reading, but it's infuriating.
What level would the Affluent Society be?
Probably a 4.
Because it's in my library, but I haven't read it yet, so like I know it's one of the ones I'm going to be popping into.
If I recall correctly, there's technical language in it, but it's not like, it's somewhere between the two. Like, it's not like you need to learn an entire new vocabulary and rethink your entire attitude on life to understand it. But there is some level of technical language. Most of it's pretty accessible.
Okay.
So, MUI Pikachu, again, part of the reason why I do politics on my weekly live show is because I do get really annoyed when leftists tell others that they have to read theory. Fun fact, Cirrus, do you want to talk about how we met? This story comes up every fucking time. So,
me and Allie met in Xander Hall's server, pre-Xander Hall.
Yeah, when he was still called Pig Puncher.
And when we met because we were having a disagreement about what specific genre you would consider the Harry Potter series. and that disagreement lives strong to this day.
It really does.
It hasn't changed. We're having this conversation about reading. Our friendship began because we could not agree with each other when it came to reading. And this, as many of my friends will attest, if I'm arguing with you, the chances of me becoming your friend actually increase quite a bit.
Well, and you and I also got into an argument about Stoicism early on because I was like, you don't know what Stoicism is. And you, by the time we were done, you were like, yeah, you're right, I didn't.
Well, and the reason that came up for Stoicism was that there was a unnamed old friend who would use Stoicism as their argument for being an ass shit. And as a result...
my response was, being an ass shit is actually anathema to Stoicism. But, like, the other half, though, of the story of how we met, Cirrus, was the context of me asking you to explain that was about... Do you get annoyed when people tell you that leftists need to read theory? What project were we working on back then to try to make it so people didn't have to read theory?
We were working on something that the Gravel Institute ultimately ended up becoming. Like, they ended up doing that because they had the funding and the know-it-all to do it. We were working on a version of that. I was actually specifically tasked with doing the project called Politics is Non-Binary. Which was basically just pointing out that no, not all politics just fall on a strict left or right axes. Like, these are actually really bad measurement devices. We just use them because they're utilitarian.
I
Like,
still have the script I wrote for you for that. And I have read it out loud and people still say it sounds more like you than it does me, which is hilarious because I wrote that script for you. He and I actually got to know each other in part because I had to get to know him in order to get his voice, which is a writing term. In this sense, the way you speak. I had to get to know him a bit in order to get that down, and then it turned out we had more in common than we thought. For those that are asking what kind of leftist I am an anarcho-syndicalist. I have a tendency to be of the mind that there's a certain level of hierarchy that is required, but not up to and including the state. So, super unions are probably a good thing for organizing trade. That way, if a particular town or a particular industry is niche but still necessary, their union can potentially negotiate with other unions that might be larger or have more members in order to make sure that they don't get left behind.
Whereas I'm a democratic socialist, I don't necessarily have an issue with the state. My issue with the state generally begins and ends where you place government on the social hierarchy. If you have government in an anti-anarchist sense and you have it above the people, then we have issues and we need to have a fucking conversation. If you have it below the people and you have it in a proper anarchistic hierarchy, then I don't have as much of an issue with it then. Because then it's a justified hierarchy, a government beholden to its people.
And the only way in which I could possibly see a full transition from capitalism happening now is if businesses were forced by the government to transition to becoming worker co-ops primarily, which would effectively create an anarcho-syndicalist hierarchy anyhow, or at the very least a syndicalist hierarchy. For those of you who don't know, yes, that episode on co-ops is coming, and yes, Jen and I are going to do it together. But that's one of those things. If you ask us to start talking about that, the rest of this episode will be the two of us bickering. It is glorious and funny. And at some point,
we can go with this for hours. We have before.
We have legitimately got. If I ever get to come out to visit you, we're gonna have to do that. People are not gonna leave it alone now.
Guess we just sit down. All right, 3 hours. Let's talk. Let's talk ideal utopian society from beginning to end. Let's go. Let's fight. Let's poke holes in each other's ideologies. Let's do it.
We have had so much fun doing that. Again, Lasurus and I literally became friends while punching each other in the face philosophically. It was kind of glorious.
That said, we had to read a lot to get to the point where we could do that. So let's talk about reading.
For once, you're the one bringing me back to topic. This is shocking. Normally, I'm the person who has to keep the order. So, coming back to literacy, though, Melodil distracted me again. Shout out to everyone. Looking forward to joining the IWW. Thank you so much, Melida. And Moto Kanodo 200 says, so how do you feel about the minimum wage? That is not the topic for today. I think it's too fucking low. I think that a minimum wage of at least $20 an hour is basically required for most of the U.S., and it needs to be much higher in places like my state.
It's 22 in Georgia. It has to be at least 22 in Georgia to cover everything from medical expenses to education to children to everything else. You have to have at least 22. Though if the question is about how do you feel about the concept of the minimum wage, there's a word we have for it: necessary evil.
Mm-hmm. So long as capitalism is required, then unfortunately the minimum wage needs to be there so that the companies don't just wring their workers out for literally nothing. So coming back to kind of the discussion of literacy, let's get into the systemic issues for a minute, because we were starting to get into the social justice component. And again, there are power dynamics that are created by that. The big one being that of the employer. There's a very limited number of industries that folks from, especially company towns, is where you see a lot of illiteracy. You see it a lot in Appalachia. That's not an insult to anybody who's from Appalachia. It's just, this is, again, one of the places that was cited in the study. Appalachia, certain states, particularly in the South, Alabama was another big one. Georgia was listed, parts of Texas. There was another one listed in the study, I think it was Louisiana. Large parts of Louisiana.
None of those surprise me because every one of those places has a very non-dense rural population.
Mm-hmm. And the thing is rural areas are where you see a lot of this. When you see extreme poverty, which a lot of rural areas have, or the other one that surprised me was the inner city areas. Certain areas in the middle of the bad parts of town, so to speak, apparently also have this problem. Places that, if you go back to the 60s, might have had these very red lines drawn around them in terms of who could get loans to buy houses there.
Nope. That's illegal. Just like company towns, Aliakai.
You mean like the company towns that still exist in Appalachia?
You mean like the red lines that still exist since after they were drawn?
Yeah, those red lines are just now drawn in terms of like what your credit score is. They're just not drawn in by the government anymore.
Nope, not drawn in by the government. They're not just drawn in by credit score as well, though. They're also drawn in because that's what happens when you have your education system not federally funded, but funded by local property taxation.
Mm-hmm. And now we're getting into the systemic issues. So I'm going to let Cirrus pop off on this, but I will tell a personal story after you do, because we actually had a school that's right down the street from me that had to get torn down because of asbestos still being in the walls. Because that's how poor the school district that I live near is.
You know, am I just going to have to talk about like tearing down and rebuilding my house?
Which I actually explicitly said I was not throwing shade at Appalachia, but it is listed in most of these studies as one of the main places where this is a problem.
It's not throwing shade. We're just trying to cool you guys down.
So let's talk a little bit about why property taxes funding schools are a whole ass problem.
Okay. This is one that I feel very, very passionately about, because I live in an area where you can actually. So if you've ever been to Atlanta is this really weird, like the whole area is this really weird amalgamation where you can walk one way down the street and you can get into the gentrified nice places. And then if you turn a road the wrong way, you'll find yourself on a dividing line and you'll just walk into the non-gentrified zones, the places that are very, very low income and have stayed that way for years. It doesn't take long to do it. And if you've lived in Atlanta, you know what I mean, where you take a left turn and suddenly you've hit all of the thrift stores, all the Goodwill stores, everything, because the whole area can only afford to go there. It sucks, but it is how this place is geographically laid out, because we were not. A lot of places around here were not planned. They were just kind of organically developed. If you look at the road structure for the Atlanta region, it's all very organic and not grid based. So when you're talking about the education system, your education system is funded primarily in the United States by property taxes. Now, when we're talking about education funding, we're talking about everything from the meals they're able to eat, so the nutrition that kids are able to put in their bodies. We're talking about the stuff that teachers
the funding for assistance programs too for those meals.
Also, the funding for equipment that the teachers can use, which means if they
get any at all, because some schools require teachers to buy their own supplies.
Well, I'm not even talking about school supplies at this point. I'm talking about stuff like computer stations. I'm talking about stuff that all kids are supposed to be able to have access to in the modern day. There are people who grow up in certain areas of the United States who don't have access to a computer because their parents can't afford one, even though they've become so cheap now. But the ones that are cheap, a lot of times are stuff like Raspberry Pis, where you've got to have a certain amount of technical knowledge to run one. So that's still not really something that you're going to be able to do off the top of your head. And then when you go to school, a lot of schools don't have access to modern computer systems, at least not stuff that they would be able to very easily recognize. And if they
let's not even talk about computer systems. Do you mind if I hijack this for a second for a personal anecdote?
Oh, by all means, because I've got a handful too.
So I have a little bit of a unique situation in that my stepfather came from a rather wealthy family. So did my father, for that matter. But I only spent the first 5 years of my life or so with that side of my family. My stepfather came from, basically his mother was the wealthy heiress to a defunct railroad company who got to make off with most of the money with the shares. So we lived in Section 8 housing for the richest neighborhood in Seattle for the first 6 years or so of my life after my mom got me back. Then after that, we moved to a town called Covington. Now, for any of you who don't know Washington, Covington was basically a forest when I was growing up. Like, it was very poor, along the lines of Kent, which is also large parts of Kent are very poor. It was extremely underdeveloped. There are a lot of like mini malls and like it's very urban sprawl now. But back then, I went running through like undeveloped forest land as a kid. Thing is, the name of the neighborhood that I spent time in Seattle was Magnolia. Magnolia was so rich that our elementary school had a rock climbing wall, a disco set, like unicycles and bowling sets, a gigantic jungle gym that came out from the walls in the gym, a massive library, and 2 play courts.
That's Pensacola Christian Academy.
When I moved
That's what we had.
When I moved in 6th grade, these are 2 different public schools though. When I moved in 6th grade, I also got to play with robots in my elementary school in Magnolia. We had like a robotics program where we got to play with Kinects. It was called Spectrum. You got pulled out of class and you could play with robots. You could play with Kinects. They let me write a play and we put it on. This is the kind of encouragement we got. Versus when I moved in 6th grade, it was the last year. I was supposed to go to middle school in the Seattle school district, but when we moved to the Kent school district, they made us stay back one more year because they hadn't moved the 6th graders up to middle school yet. So our books were so outdated that there were still, this was in the mid 2000s. We had textbooks that were as old as the early 1990s.
That's a lot of outdated material, especially if it's a science book.
Mm-hmm. Like the computers and stuff, like they had access to computers, but it was like there was one computer lab and everybody had to fight over who got to use it. Individual classrooms did not have computers in them for the most part, maybe one, but it was for the teacher. Radical difference in student population. Like we had classrooms of maybe 10 to 15 people in Magnolia. In Covington, it was 43 people in my 6th grade class, and there were 4 others that had about the same population.
And the quality of education in the smaller classroom was definitely going to be higher because the teachers can spend more time with each individual student.
Carbuncle, Magnolia, not Cap Hill. So, yeah. Just to give you guys kind of a small example within my own life, both of those were actually radically different from when we then moved to Omaha in the middle of my high school years, where Omaha, we had 8 classes in a day, and certain subjects that in Washington were, say, junior, senior high school level were actually like freshman, sophomore. It's radically different. I actually had to take remedial classes in order to like get set up to graduate because there were classes that did not exist in the Washington curriculum that existed in Omaha. And I went to one of the best schools in Omaha because we lived right underneath it, like right down the hill. I literally walked to school uphill both ways, funnily enough, because I had to go walk up the other hill to go pick my sister up every day.
I only got to have a lot of this experience by proxy, by having people explain it to me, because my education was going from Pensacola Christian Academy, which for most subjects taught at about 2 or 3 grades above the level. Like you were learning algebra at 4th grade. Of course, science, everybody was woefully illiterate at because it was a young earth creationist school. So we thought we were very literate. We were not. But after that, I went to Brown Barge, which was a magnet school. And then after that, I went to West Florida High School of Advanced Technology, which was another magnet school. So I only got to have like magnet school style advanced education my entire life. It wasn't until I was told about other schools like Brownsville, for instance, or Washington High, if that even still exists in Pensacola anymore, and got told about how the curriculums were so vastly different between what I had and what they had. Like, I didn't get to experience it firsthand the way you did. I got to experience it by, having it told to me when I would explain to someone like what I was doing for my projects in school. And I would be told that, oh, they aren't supposed to be doing that for another few grades for them, or they're not going to handle that until college or what have you. That was my experience of only ever being in the advanced education.
Well, and there was also a massive difference in the support for like for lack of a better way to put it, fast start students, like kids like me that learned really, really quickly but had a slightly different learning style. In Magnolia, I definitely had support for that. And same within like Omaha, there were challenging courses and things I could take. In Covington and Kent, they did not have a good advanced program for kids that would get bored and fall behind. Which honestly, fast start learners falling behind and later, falling into lower literacy levels is actually a big problem. Like kids who get bored and drop out, that's a huge issue.
The closest thing we had for anything that could handle that, I think, was the PATS program, but I don't even know how effective that was. I don't know if they had an equivalent where you are.
Yeah, the advanced programs were Spectrum, and then later on you got into it was like the principal program where you were in all advanced classes. You would actually, in Washington, once you got to high school, you had these teacher groupings. So like if your earth sciences teacher, because that was our freshman thing, earth sciences teacher, English teacher, etc., they were all in groups. So if you had the same earth sciences teacher as another person, you also would have the same English teacher as the other person, even if you were in different periods for that class. So they did that. And if you got put into the advanced group, you got a different set of teachers than if you were put into the normal group or in the special ed group. Victoria, anyone else noticed every rabbit hole, nutrition, science, food security, housing, education, social issues, you end up in a cavern of capitalism? Why do you think we're leftists? We can drink to that.
Would you like to know why we came to the positions we did economically? Because every time it always comes down to, wait a minute, society could be doing better for the people that live in it. Why is it not? Well, maybe we should make society do better. Because it's not an individual issue. You ask a libertarian about this, and they're going to go with, it's an individual problem. Individual people can get out of it always. Okay, cool. But if you're only ever citing individual people, you're literally never once citing data. You become a leftist because of data.
Yeah, I mean, you become a leftist because the statistics are on your side. Let's actually talk a little bit about that. Why it's not an individual problem. Because you and I, for example, both got to some degree to experience what that inequality looks like. Like, I actually got to live both sides of it, and you got to find out from other people what both sides of it looked like. But neither of us had a choice ourselves in what schools we went to. So, like, neither of us really had a choice in the fact that we got an advantage in our education.
If your education was just an individual issue, then you would have a say in the high school you went to. You would have a say, oh, this is an important one. I mentioned you would have a say in what high school you went to. Oh, that's a funny one. You don't, though. Not just because your parents get to choose where you go. No. That's not where the lack of choice begins. In many states, including the one I grew up in, your ability to go to any individual high school is influenced primarily by your location. Not, are you 25 miles away from this? Can you reasonably go drive there the same way you do for something like work? No. Places where you're legally allowed to go. You are legally supposed to stay within the places that your property taxes pay for, which means that if you are in a low-income area, you will receive a low-income education, and you cannot go get a high-income education by driving a handful more miles. That's not a thing you can legally do in most places.
Unless you go to a private school, and even then, you have to have the financial means, which again, you as a kid still have no control over, in order to afford that private school. And even if you pay for a private school, there is, depending on where you live, DeVos, anyway, depending on where you live, even if you go to a private school, it might be a for-profit private school that is not going to have a better quality education than the public offerings.
Or you will have a better quality education in some areas, but a worse one in others, because your private education will be places like Pensacola Christian Academy, which are funded by the Seventh-day Adventists and old IFB. Yay.
Oh, gods, the school voucher thing came up.
Okay, so what is a school voucher?
You actually live in an area that's... This is the whole Betsy DeVos was heavily lobbying for this. This is the government gives a voucher that a family of any income can use to go to any school, including a charter school, like a private school or a public school. So
Okay,
that's
no, I don't like that idea. And would you like to know why? That should have been an option you could have gone through without the fucking red tape. That should have been a thing you were able to do to begin with. Because if you have an overcrowded and underfunded school, but there are people from the overcrowded, underfunded school that are able to do things without the red tape. They're able to just pick up and take their children elsewhere to a less overcrowded, underfunded school. You may still have an underfunded school for the children that are still in that area, but it's no longer overcrowded. And overcrowded classrooms are already areas where you cannot get a good quality education to begin with. You, at the very least, can remove one of the factors that are impacting people's education by letting them move and go to other areas for their schooling. By putting it behind a voucher, just like with multiple other types of public assistance, you force the parents who, if they're working 2 or 3 jobs, might not have the fucking time to go through all that paperwork or the wherewithal or the spoons to do all that. Is it a great idea on paper? Sure. Is it a great idea when you just hand it to somebody and go, do you think people should be allowed to do this? Sure. But when you consider the actual economic situation that most people are in, and the mental situation most people are in, having access to something like that, but putting it behind something like a voucher system is not a good implementation of that idea. And in a strange double bind, when you use something like a school voucher, if I come at that and try to argue against it, not you as an individual, but somebody like Betsy DeVos would be able to then go, why do you not want people to be able to seek better educations for themselves? It creates a double bind where I cannot win by arguing against your broken system because your broken system is an answer to an already broken system. There's my fucking rant. Okay.
Well, and I actually agree with Akeda there. Often the private school voucher program thing, one of the things that people don't mention is that does take money away from public schools. Like, those vouchers then replace the funding that would have gone to that school for that student. And now it's going to this private school, which more often than not is a private religious school. And again, the DeVos family operates a gigantic cartel, and I'm going to call it that. Allegedly, it is my opinion that the Betsy DeVos family, the DeVos family, operates a cartel of for-profit schools. And last I checked, one of the articles that I read said that something like 1/3 of them got shut down for treating students like shit or for not having proper facilities or other very basic things. Like, just because a school is private doesn't automatically mean it's better, especially if it's operated by a company.
Even when you have a school that is better in certain areas, it can still do. Okay, so we brought up computer literacy, right? What is one of the things that most people need to do to have a functioning social life right now that is part of computer literacy? The ability to operate social media, right? Like, social media is how almost everybody is communicating right now because of how screwed up the world is at the moment because of COVID. Do you want to know something that my old school did? Not just the school, the college, because PCA is a K-12 school that also has a college campus. When MySpace came out, they did the standard evangelical thing of seeing something new and immediately calling it demonic. They funded printing of shirts like that said shit like Jesus died for MySpace, and they
Did Cirrus die on just my end, or is everybody else seeing the same thing?
Can you hear me? Because I'm still here.
Well, I'm seeing the live playback show that you froze on their end too, and on mine, and apparently my voice went through. So you are back, but apparently StreamYard just decided that rant was just not worth airing. I guess try it again.
Nope, StreamYard, I will air my rant. PCA, when social media first became a commonplace thing, did things like printing T-shirts that said that Jesus died for MySpace. They did things like making it to where they considered being on MySpace a sin. It was a carnal sin. It was a form of worship. And if you were on MySpace back during the beginning of standardized social media, you could be kicked out of school, both from the standard K through 12 school and college. It was one of those things, like, when I was growing up, it was discovering that the child was playing Pokemon. That was the thing that could get you in trouble. By the time I left, the things that I heard from ex-PCA students, because by the way, if you lived in Pensacola, we called it Prison Camp of America. Everybody who was in public school who heard you came from PCA said, "Oh, you were in Prison Camp of America." That makes sense. PCA would make it, if we're going to talk about literacy, and computer literacy is part of that, making it to where it's a sin to engage on social media during the early years of social media literally is hampering the fucking computer literacy of your students. Because for them to do something that right now is completely and 100% essential for people, that was considered something that would get you burning in hell. You would become Satan's bacon for being on fucking MySpace. Okay, sorry. My childhood is coming back, and I don't like it.
Yeah, that sounds like a thing. It sounds like you had a hell of a experience.
Look, I want to go back. I want to do a video where I go back on to the Pensacola Christian Academy. Well, I can't really go onto the campus and walk around it because the entire thing's gated because it's a fucking compound. But I want to. I want to go in and just walk around the campus and just be like, hey, this is where I grew up. This was hell.
Tiralana with a $5 super chat says, I have feelings about private Christian schools, none of them charitable. You get hit with a paddle without parental consent and it still pisses you off.
To be fair, we did not have corporal punishment in the one that I grew up in. To be fair to the prison camp.
Carp says Satan's bacon is her new favorite line. So let's get back a little bit to that sort of issue of the ways in which not getting a proper education can hamper you later in life. Because I don't think people stop to realize, A, how slinging illiterate as an insult ultimately harms people, which I know that you and I talked about this before the show a little bit, but like, when
look,
you're talking about...
if I'm dealing with call for an uprising, I'm going to call him an illiterate dumb shit. That's not going to stop, but go like, on.
If you actually talk about illiteracy, most people don't realize, I think, how wide the scope of the problem is and how much that actual illiteracy, like real, genuine illiteracy, can destroy somebody's life. Like, we talked a little bit about promotional opportunities and, like, what kind of jobs you can get, but there's even more than that. When you're talking about the power dynamics with, say, somebody has to read your mail, there's that sort of aspect. There's also the ability for you to help your kids because, like, again, we're back to generational poverty in that situation. You know, often these are people whose kids end up growing up with lower skills because their parents can't help them out and obviously are in lower, like, income levels themselves most of the time. So they can't necessarily, say, hire a tutor or something. And they probably live in a low income area, which means they probably can't get that extra help at school. Which means also if that kid, say, has a disability or something, where's the support going to come from? It sure as hell ain't coming from home.
It's not coming from bot lane either.
Or from the jungle. The jungle ain't coming to save you. But then you think about the way that ripples out later on in your life. There was a really good video done by another channel which blew up recently. It was by, like, Thought Slime gave them a shout out. I'll have to go and find her name again. But she did a video on illiteracy where she talked about how in certain areas, like, it's possible that you might, say, get the instructions for how to build a car seat and not be able to understand them. The example she gave was from a Facebook group, a mom support group, where somebody was asking for, can somebody explain this to me in more simple language than what I'm reading? Zoe B, yes, Zoe B did a video on this. I highly recommend y'all check out Zoe B's channel, by the way. Her channel is amazing. I don't know her personally, but I've really enjoyed all the videos that I've seen from her. Ikeda Hakubi said, I would eat Satan's bacon with a rusty electrified spork. We need t-shirts. Oh, God.
We will make a joint Teespring, and Satan's bacon will be on the Teespring.
With the rusty electrified spork. Do you know about that meme, Cirrus? Were you there for the Thanksgiving stream?
I was not there for the Thanksgiving stream.
Oh god, Ikeda is now spamming the emote. The rusty electrified spork was, I got mad in the Thanksgiving stream because of course I did. It was fucking Thanksgiving. I was going to be salty. You've heard the rant every year.
But you're supposed to be thankful we genocided you with smallpox blankets.
Fucking hell. You are the asshole that's gonna play the smallpox blankets card on me when we play like Cards Against Humanity, aren't you? You're that asshole.
No. I'm the asshole that's going to write in something much worse.
Oh no. I am afraid. Help me, chat. Help me. Why are all of my friends horrible? I don't understand. But like I got fucking salty and I was like, if any of y'all want to sit here and tell me that I just need to get in line and, let other people celebrate it and be happy, then y'all can fuck yourselves with a rusty electrified spork. It's covered in rust. How is it electrified? I don't fucking know, but you can shove it right up your ass. And like,
it can be covered in rust and still be okay, look, listen. When the flakes of rust fall off on their skin then makes contact with the conductive material. It works.
The point being is that the chat lost their shit and it became demanded. It was the very first server lore that everybody demanded to become server lore. Like it has become a meme by the sheer force of will of the chat that day. Apparently the Funkle Sex Party has become the same. That was from the last show. What?
Or
everybody is now terrified.
Don't be terrified. There's nothing to be afraid of yet.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the things that we can do, both individually and kind of as a society. Let's start with individual stuff because, not everybody listens past an hour when they watch, longer live streams in post. Let's talk a little bit about that stuff. Eat the rich, huh? There are actually a number of literacy programs that are always looking for volunteers at libraries and stuff. There are also a number of literacy-related nonprofits, which I would give you a recommendation, but most of them are state specific. So if you're in the States, I would highly recommend looking for one in your state. Donating money to those is actually extremely efficient, much in the same way that I told people to stop buying food for food drives and stuff and just go to your local food bank and see if you can donate cash because they can use it much more effectively. Very similar thing with literacy programs. If you aren't interested in volunteering or don't have the time, there are lots and lots of places where you can get money. However, there's a lot of let's get up and call our fucking Congress people, namely specifically your state Congress people. This would not be your national Congress people. These are your state Congress people, which are going to be far easier to reach, by the way, because they have far fewer constituents.
All pragmatic politics begin at the local level. All of them. All of them, fuckers. Okay,
Reading is fundamental. Ha, Ikeda. Ha. Thank you so much for the super chat.
I don't have much room left in my head for that joke.
Oh, you're as bad as Ocean. But
I would say he said hi, but all he could do was wave.
That's horrible. Why? Why me? I was trying to get out the point. Another big thing that you can do is to talk to your local Congress people, especially try to petition Congress, write to them. Writing an actual physical letter is one of the most effective ways. Funnily enough, even post-COVID, emails they get a billion of. If you took the time to write a fucking handwritten letter or even to print one out and mail one,
and
that's going to get a lot more attention.
And their voicemail is full.
Yeah, their voicemail is full, and if you do get reached like a volunteer, they, having volunteered once, most of what we had were issue sheets where we had like checkboxes and things for like, oh, you got this many calls on this issue and this is what side they sat on it. Your specific individual feedback doesn't really get recorded most of the time. What gets recorded is that you are pro-abortion or anti-abortion, and that's what you called about.
Yep.
So if you were to physically write a letter to your local congresspeople, so again, your state, not your national, these are the people in your state congress, which state congresses are fucking wild, guys. Like there was footage that got put up on John Oliver of people from my state getting into a freaking fist fight on the congressional floor, because that's how nuts this shit gets. Like tell them that you want to see the way that taxes are applied for school systems reformed. Because currently, a lot of these problems stem back from property taxes being the way that these things are funded. And when you're in a low-income area, the property's necessarily going to be cheaper. There's going to be less taxpayers paying that tax.
Okay, are you okay?
I'm frustrated by the whole thing. This is a topic that I have a lot of, like, I'll put it to you this way. I was one of the first people in my mom's side of the family to pursue any level of higher education. My mom's side of the family is extraordinarily poor, which is, pretty typical. Like, we're native. But, like, my grandpa on my mom's side, before he died when I was young, but he had a hard time reading.
The only people in... Oh, go on.
Like one of my aunts had a hard time reading before she passed away. Like this is something that is a little bit personal because there are people in my family that don't necessarily function all that well past like a 6th grade level.
I know for my family, the only reason anybody even has any money is because of the military. Like historically in my family, the only route out of poverty, with one exception, has been the military. That's it.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why I say judge the military as an institution, not individuals that are in the military. Because a lot of the time, the only way you're getting a college education, even if you get good enough grades to get into one, is through the GI Bill. It's one of the few things that are going to get most people into school.
Like, it's the reason why when somebody was like, wait, you support the military? Because I pointed out that, having trans people being able to get in the military is a good thing. It's like, well, look, trans people most likely are going to be some of the most impoverished because they come with medical bills that cis people just don't have the time. Things like HRT, things like therapy for just existing in a society that doesn't accept them. Like a lot of that shit can only really be funded well by and not to mention like the GI Bill giving you access to education. Trans people are not as safe in lower income jobs because there's a much higher level of bigotry in lower income jobs because of the lack of education. In a higher income job, you are generally going to experience less of it necessarily. And sometimes the only way to get into a higher income job is by having a degree, not counting the medical expenses that can be paid for by the military.
Well, and on top of it, when you're talking about like income stratification, bigotry in general has a tendency to be correlated with income to some degree. The more educated you get, on average, this is not, like obviously there are highly educated bigots that still exist because they choose to remain ignorant in certain circumstances. Several of them are currently sitting in Congress. But for the most part, there is a sharp correlation between the level of education that you get and the level of progressive politics and belief that you tend to hold. And I'm using progressive politics here because those who are progressive are far less likely to be homophobic, transphobic, racist, etc.
Granted, there's also another correlation here that you're also more likely to live in a dense city, and being in a dense city instead of a rural area, you tend to actually have more access to different kinds of people around you geographically, and it's more expensive to live in a dense city than it is to live in a rural area, which means income will always be a factor here right now.
Yeah, Matt, I feel ya. I'm not a leftist in the military, but I do come from a semi-military-ish family. And I have a lot of friends who are in the military. A lot of them don't want to be there, but ended up there because of necessity. And I honestly think that it is not fair to judge a person for joining the military for the things that politicians force the military to do. A lot of folks, it is their way out of poverty. That's the end of it. Sup, Wolf? Welcome to the party. We're talking about depressing shit. So let's talk a little bit more about some of the things that we can do kind of on a systemic level to help correct this. Changing school funding is one of the big things, right? Like that is one of the big issues, is that if we had state income taxes, which Washington doesn't have one, funnily enough, we pay through everything, every fucking thing through sales tax, property taxes, and I'm trying to remember what the other one is, business taxes.
I know we have state taxes here in Georgia, but I'm not 100% on where they all go.
We're not talking about scholarships in this stream, in part because we're not talking about folks, like, we're not talking about getting into college. We're talking about basic literacy skills. Like, we're talking about the most, you could graduate high school or get a GED kind of literacy skills. This is the stuff that 52% of Americans do not hit the bare minimum for. Like, we can talk about higher education later, and in fact, I would love to do a stream on higher education in the future, because higher education has its own host of fucking problems, not in the least of which being that, like, the tuition rate for the school that I attended has gone up almost 40% in the last 10 years.
And the quality of education probably remained, at the very least, unchanged.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to be able to get access to some type of higher education, but I also can't afford it. And I'm not 100% certain if I'm ever going to be able to afford it. But, nah.
Quick plug for Wolf, by the way. If anybody in my audience who's hanging out here is not subscribed to him, please go check out his channel. He and I are actually going to be doing a premiere tomorrow, each of a collaborative set of videos that we did on the topic of religious consent. Wolf is primarily going to be covering group consent, so group rituals and understanding, and like informed consent on the group side. I'm primarily going to be covering individual consent, including things like consent in divination, consent for healing work, and consent in prayer, and like to engage with deity in the first place. Including things like, say, if somebody, I have an atheist friend, which I happen to have one on right now. Cirrus, when I've asked you, like, when you've talked to me about your problems and stuff in the past, I know you usually respond with, I don't care. But when I talk to you about, hey, would you like me to pray for you? I generally phrase things as, would you like me to make an offering to X God when I'm in my ritual next for this thing? Like, I tend to be very forthright with you about that. And you can tell me yes or no, and I don't judge you either way. But the point is it's framed as a question.
As opposed to the way it's usually done in evangelical circles. I'll pray for you.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, well, no, you don't understand. Your God flooded the entire world because people were fucking giants. I don't want his help. I'll be fine. Thanks.
So yeah, that's Wolf and I are going to be covering that tomorrow. I'm really excited. He has had a pretty big bit of growth in his channel as of late too. Same with like Ocean and I. Ocean has exploded. But if you guys are not subscribed to Wolf, then he is actually in the recommended channels list on my channel page. So when this stream is over in about probably 15-20 minutes or so, go check out Wolf's channel and subscribe, because it's well worth it. Like, he does heathen content rather than Hellenist content, but interfaith studies is really important, especially for allyship.
Moto Konoda just wait, you're not an atheist?
Cirrus is an agnostic. I am not an atheist. I'm a Hellenist.
I'm actually perfectly fine being called an atheist. Like, colloquially, that is still where it lands. Philosophically, I know it doesn't. I understand. I know that. I've done a video on it.
Wolf says higher education is predatory, especially to younger people and neurodivergent people and impoverished and disadvantaged people. That can be true, definitely. There are some aspects of higher education that are predatory. There are some aspects of higher education that are almost mandatory for advancement. It's a grab bag, unfortunately, especially when you start talking about private colleges, which I personally think should not be a thing.
But you don't understand, Leakai. I needed to go to the highest grade Ivy League private education school. And it is because that I was in the correct social circles at that school that I was able to land this job that I definitely didn't get because my parents gave it to me.
I mean, Wolf, if that's a serious offer, Cirrus, are you cool with Wolf popping on really quick? Apparently he wants to rant.
I'm perfectly fine with Wolf coming on to rant.
All right, Wolf, if you are serious and actually want a link, you have one now.
See, what's funny is that my playlist that I play for when I'm streaming to keep my brain from like going burr is currently on like circus music right now, which is perfect because this is all a fucking clown house.
It's on Discord, Wolf. That's where I always send my links.
So you bought a degree. I didn't buy a degree. I don't have a degree. I wish I did.
Wolf, your camera is not on. Oh, there we go. You are here and we can see you. That is a that camera was very hand. I think the button on your mic has been pressed.
I'm adjusting. Hold on. Let me mute the YouTube.
Welcome to ASMR with Wolf.
Where? There's the stream. Okay. I had so many links open. All right.
So,
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, spontaneous extra guest Wolf after I just plugged the hell out of your channel.
Yeah. This is going to be really quick, but actually just like in my avoidance of writing my script, I ran down this research hole of how predatory higher education is towards younger people just coming out of like high school. So like I'll give you the situation. And it's a little bit more broad than just this select few group of people. You have people who are not doing so well in high school. They're disadvantaged. They have issues at home. They're neurodivergent. They are impoverished. They just aren't conducive to the cookie cutter education system that we have in what is high school. Stuff like that. So
apparently your voice is thirst trapping the chat.
I'm seeing that. That's cracking me up. I appreciate that. Where was I? I'm one of the neurodivergent people I was just talking about.
Yeah, you were talking about like people who are disadvantaged getting pulled into higher education.
Yeah. So, you get your guidance counselor, you get your teachers, you get your parents. Harking you at, age 15, 16, 17, 18, saying you need to do good in school so that you can get scholarships so that you can get into college. And they're like, well, if you don't get into college, what are you going to do with your life? And an answer that is not explored enough is, get a part-time job, get a trade job. There are lots of trade jobs out there that don't require a 4-year degree from a university, from a college. I am a product of that as well. And I know that I know it's not for everybody. So this isn't like a Wolf telling you this is how you should live your life if you're a young student or whatever. Don't take that as that way. But there isn't the option explored. They don't like to talk about it, where after you turn, I want to say 23, after you're 4 years out of out of high school, colleges don't pull your transcripts anymore after 4 years. So when you go to apply, they just base it off of you. Like they just base it off of like your monetary situation that you're in at the moment. They don't base it off of your parents' income. They don't base it off of the grades that you made in high school. So it's like this secret option that nobody ever talks about. And that's why I say it's super predatory, because they know that they can squeeze way more money out of you because of you're usually coming from an income that your parents make that would be way more than you would make on your own at that time. So,
however, as somebody who went through school during that time, I had to work 2 jobs to help get through it. But
Right.
there is another secret option that most people do not know about. And that is if you don't get along with your parents, if they're not helping you in any way, shape, or form, you can actually go to a guidance counselor if you get into your school very early and you talk to them very early and get written recommendations from at least 2 family members stating that you do not have contact with your parents. They can override your FAFSA requirement for your parents' income and
Right.
get you an independent voucher so that you only have to base it off your own income. But you need to actually legitimately be estranged from your parents, and you need to have family members who are willing to write you writs of recommendation saying that you're estranged. That's something that I had to do.
Yep.
Because my parents were in the process of divorcing and they were done with me at the time. And by done with me, I mean, well, y'all know a little bit about my upbringing. Like anybody who knows anything about my upbringing, both of the folks in this call, I know for a fact, like there's an angry gritted teeth that comes up when I talk about my parents because they were horrible humans when I was growing up. Like my mom and I kind of have a relationship now, but like my stepfather and I do not fucking talk. So like that is another option that a lot of people don't know about. But again, the stream was primarily about kind of like primary school stuff. Do you have any anecdotes you want to share about that? Because we were talking primarily about literacy and about the differences in education experiences that you can have in primary school. So, think K through 12. A shitty school experience, like in that regard, or a really good one, is basically kind of a circumstance of birth.
Right.
So that's primarily what the stream has been talking about.
That makes sense. I just I happened to click on it and because I saw it and I I'm going through grabbing music for my video. I hinted that I'm changing some stuff up for the video tomorrow, and I hope people are excited about it as I am. But as far
I
as
just got done editing mine right before the stream.
Yep.
I just need to make the thumbnail and get it up for patrons.
it's all I got left to do is to throw this music on there, thumbnail, and then throw it up there for patrons, and then I'll be heading to bed. But I saw that I wanted to say hey because I like saying hey when I see your streams, and then I saw that and I was like, wait, I literally just did research on this the other day when I was avoiding writing my script.
You should make a video on it. Like that'd be something that I think your audience would be into.
I'm not the
Why
person
not?
to make that video. That's not me.
Well,
I'm not qualified. But I did run across that information, and I thought it was
There's no such thing as qualified on YouTube.
By saying you're not qualified, you've already fallen for the predatory tactics of those college industries.
God damn it, sirs. Using my own logic against me. This is what I get for coming on stream. This is what I get.
You made the mistake of coming on stream with me, and I deal with this shit every day.
I get bullied by intelligent sirs.
I'm not intelligent. I'm a fucking idiot. I am the living argument. I am the living argument against your qualification thing because I'm a fucking moron and I do this full time.
That is incorrect, sir. I've been watching you for years.
Okay, so Wolf, I love you. This is imposter syndrome.
I mean, yeah, sure. I'm willing to admit that. That doesn't fix it though.
Like you're one of my best friends, and I'm sitting here going, like, you always downplay your intelligence, but you're fucking brilliant. So now I have shamed
it's
you. It's
usually because I'm in a room full of geniuses at all times.
Wait, so you're saying Wolf's the imposter?
Yes.
I mean, I technically
Red is always
as a
sus.
Vote him out.
Red is always sus. Uh-oh. I'm being voted out.
I just want to say, welcome to the cold expanse of space, motherfucker.
Oh my god.
Okay.
Cirrus, good god. All right, so we are now in the wrap up and chill portion. I know you've been working on something really cool. Do you want to talk about some of your some stuff you got coming up?
So I'm in the middle of working on a Dangerous Woo episode. It is I'm actually I can't do it until I'm done working on the sponsorship for the episode. But the company that is in talks about sponsorship requires me to hit level 15 in their game, and I don't want to bitch about it publicly. But I'm working on a Dangerous Woo episode on conversion therapy, where I'm going to be going into a few clips of people who have gone through conversion therapy, and then going into the history of it, dating back to when Sigmund Freud argued that it was something that could be nurtured out of an individual by things like literally things like rebirthing or putting on 40-pound backpacks on people to represent the burden of liking butt shit, I guess. I don't know. But that's going to be fun. My anxiety has gotten very high listening to a lot of the testimonials from people who have come out of conversion therapy. I also have a video on the old evangelical arguments against Pokemon that is being produced by me and Prophet Azad. It's going to be a two-parter. Part 1 is going to be on his channel. Part 2 is going to be on my channel. And that collaboration is being worked on soon. And tomorrow, for those of you who are familiar with the Cavernacle, he's been going into a lot of alt-right spaces and figuring out, like, why do they like certain kinds of anime? Why are there certain groups of people who are attracted to the alt-right? I'm going to be on stream with Cavernacle tomorrow talking about why the alt-right tends to attack, not necessarily attack, but tends to prey on people who are prone to depression and other mental illnesses, because there is a high level of people who find themselves falling into the alt-right or Gamergate and shit like that, because they're depressed and they feel like they're ostracized in an out group and they need an in group, and the alt-right is there with open arms. So that's all the stuff I got coming up right now.
Yeah, I actually have been working on a critique of his video on why the alt-right likes, like, why so many neo-Nazis are pagans.
That was actually one of the things that when I saw it, I was like, I hope you don't tackle this from a bad angle, because I know that when he tackled the Attack on Titan thing, he tackled it while not having watched the show, and as somebody who's watched the show, I had a few disagreements with it, because I was like, okay, yes, there are problems with the society they constructed, but they're not the ones that you mentioned. Overall, like, I think the issue for me, I don't know if it's going to be the same for you, the issues with me came down to individual nitpicks, not necessarily the whole message as a whole.
Yeah, with the pagan video, it was similar. My problem is that there was a framing issue. He framed paganism as though it were universal in a lot of ways, making a nod to the fact that there were a bunch of different religions, but not recognizing that there's a very different draw for a neo-Nazi, like an actual neo-Nazi, versus like for a Greek ethno-nationalist. Mm-hmm. He, like, while getting very detailed into the history of the Holocaust and of the Neo-Volkish movement, he completely neglected modern paganism in a way that, like, is almost inexcusable given the framing of the rest of the video and how understanding he was. Like, he also kind of gave a brief nod to, like, yeah, not all pagans are Nazis and there are people that are fighting it, but, like, it was almost an aside versus the majority of the video was very much framed in a way that bothered me.
Yep, understandable.
Yeah, he got his history right, but, like, he got the modern stuff wrong, which is kind of similar to the problem that you had.
Yeah, where it's like, yes, anime spaces do tend to have a high degree of these amount of people, and yes, a lot of them do tend to like stuff like Attack on Titan, but it's not like the Attack on Titan stuff isn't because people want the fascist undertones that are in Attack on Titan. It's because that happens to be an incredibly popular shonen style anime right now, and that is not to be a dick, but that is the lowest common denominator anime that people get into 9 times out of 10 is your standard violent shonen stuff. Like it is a product of that, not necessarily like the cause.
Well, yeah, and like there was a little bit of that, I think, in his neo-Nazi video as well. Why so many neo-Nazis are pagans. Again, I'm working on sort of a carefully constructed response. I'm not like going for the gut on this one, but I am going to be talking about nuance in rhetoric, because if you're going to be taking on a group that you're not a member of, it's always important to make sure you actually understand them. Like we had a whole thing about the frickin' Rolling Stone implying that all of heathenry was neo-Nazi, and the community took that on with flying colors and the full force of all of the heathen anger that you could possibly see. I did a video on that. So, like, the implications in his video, although he tried to be more understanding and tried to talk around it a little bit, there was more of a framing issue. That was my problem.
Yep. I think that's where it comes down a lot, is that, like, he goes in broad strokes and he gets a lot of stuff right, but then there's just like a handful of things that if you're plugged into a community, you can catch.
Well, and the problem is that sometimes with this one, I think that video can actually be destructive toward the pagan community. Because it reinforces stereotypes that are extremely harmful to us, you know?
Yeah, understandable.
It's like when, and you and I have had this conversation, y'all want to hear Cirrus and I get into it and agree on something. It's about how atheists talk about religion.
If somebody starts going in and saying, "Oh, don't you understand? Religion is the disease and Dawkins is the cure." And I'm just like,
which
okay.
religion?
He's like, first of all, which religion? Because, like, Satanism's got your back 9 times out of 10. But
I mean, and most pagans will too. Like the fucking shield wall and the phalanx are a whole ass thing.
So it's, the first video me and Ocean did together was going on, like, these are the arguments that atheists have against God that actually aren't cogent. 9 times out of 10. Stop using these. You can do better. Discourse can be improved.
So finishing up my part of the shill portion, obviously I shilled a little bit about the video that I'm doing tomorrow. I'll be covering religious consent, why not a lot of people think about it, why we need to think about it more, and some suggestions I have toward the pagan community specifically, but can be useful for anybody from any community regarding things like prayer, whether or not a divine experience means you have to go worship a deity, like whether or not that's prescriptive, the ways that people tend to mistreat each other around things like divination, which I also have a spot on Wolf's video where I talk about divination and the ethics around doing readings for other people. So if you're curious about that, you should check out his video too. And I also talk a little bit about how we can do better. Like what I think would be a good framework to at least start the conversation, and how I think that my and Wolf's video are just the start to the conversation, that it's one that we need to have as a community, as a larger community, and as a part of us being together as allies and being together as part of our individual faiths. So I've got that coming up. And because Jen had sick kid today, Jen and I have agreed to do a special Saturday episode of the Coalition. We are going to be doing a Q&A stream. Bring all of your bizarre freaking questions. We're going to be hanging out and interacting with the chat primarily. So we will be having a lot of fun on Saturday night. And then next Wednesday, hopefully, assuming that there isn't any sort of weird emergency that happens on either side, Jen and I will be back with the regularly scheduled Coalition.
Woo!
So, with that, I think we're about at wrap up. Thank you so much, Cirrus, for coming on short notice. Like, I know that you're a really busy person, but like, you're also one of my favorite people to bring on for co-host, because we do have like a great dynamic in terms of talking about these sorts of topics. We have a very similar education on a lot of these things.
In that mine is none and completely autodidactical.
I mean, Freya is right, though. Pagans will have your back unless you have technical issues. Chances are we would make that just worse considering the tech gremlins.
I modded a Nerf shotgun while Ocean was over. I primed it, fired it, everything worked fine. I handed it to Ocean, he primed it, and it would not stop jamming. It could not. He hands it to me, tech works fine. I know the internals work. I rebuilt it.
And the cult of the unblinking one livens things up too. Thank you so much, Freya. Awesome stream as always, Freya says. So I say this at the end of every show. We built the Coalition. Now let's fight. We're stronger together.